the key in all this is saying no more than saying yes. Just because, hey, I brought in a home 30 years ago under this guise and I didn't have to deal with X, Y, and Z, doesn't mean that's today.
You really want to get on the ground and you want to talk to residents, right? Because there's residents in that community that have been there forever, right? And, you know, sometimes property owners aren't there all the time.
And we're back on the MHP Exchange Podcast. I'm your host, Frank Rizzo. Joining me, of course, is my partner, Eric Busuttil. How are you this morning, Eric?
Doing good tonight, Frank.
Yeah, good, man. You look a little chipper for this morning.
Little bit. Little chipper.
Little chipper.
Yeah.
I like it. It's a little fresh breeze in the air, like spring. You could feel it's almost sprung. We're super excited to be here. First, for those of you who listen to this program at the MHP Exchange podcast, follow us on iTunes or Spotify. You know, subscribe, give us a rating, give us some feedback. Tell me what you think. Tell us what you think. And this program is brought to you by the MHPExchange.com, which is your source for opportunity, news, education, and entertainment. You can find our podcast and our video log, Trailer Park Turnaround. And it has the largest inventory of available parks or manufactured homes throughout the country and the first personal AI agent in the manufactured housing space, Chat MHP. So check that out, Chat MHP as well. So we're here today, and we're over 30 episodes in, Eric.
I do know that, Frank.
You do? How do you know?
Because I know.
Okay, he knows. So we're 30 episodes in, and we're going to touch on something that we have not touched on in the 30 episodes that we've done so far, 30-plus episodes that we've done so far. We are going to talk today about, and we've talked about on this, finding, funding, flipping, operating parks, brought you industry insiders. But the one thing we've never talked about, and so important for any real estate investor, and especially investor in this space to know, and you know what that is, Eric?
Today we're going to talk about how to walk away from a deal, or you need to be willing to walk away from a deal in order to get that deal.
See, Eric knows that because we discussed this beforehand.
Exactly.
Not just because he read my mind, but that is exactly it. It's when to walk away because, like Kenny Rogers says, you got to know when to hold them. And know when to walk away, right? So why is this important? So why are we even discussing this? Let's look at how a typical transaction, especially if you're new in the space and you're looking how this is going to get done. And obviously, we had an extensive history where we were owning and operating properties in our local market.
So one thing that is, interesting about this space, and, we didn't find out this until a few deals in, and being from New York, right, how it works is you see a property first, right? In this space, it's very common, and, with us, we'll make offers on a property and we'll get into contract a lot of times without even seeing the property.
Correct.
Right? So, it's a totally different animal than you're used to in doing that.
If you're investing locally, it's easy to go through that site beforehand and have a kind of on-the-ground knowledge before you're presenting your offer. But, it's probably not financially viable to travel across the country before making offers on properties that you don't know that you're necessarily going to get.
No, because you obviously have to travel to the property, go to the county, spend time there, in your due diligence period, and that's when you find things out, right? And also, realize when you're buying a mobile home park, a lot of times you're buying it from, a family who's had it for a very long time, right? And, they've just been accustomed to doing things the way they do things over the years. They've had the park for a long time. They move homes in, they move homes out. And when a property changes hands, obviously, the new owners need to know what the, zoning is and, what can be done or cannot be done. And a lot of times, a seller may not know that information, right? And we've found that out a few times where, a seller was under the impression that, I have X amount of lots X amount of homes, and, you know, this is what it is. And, you know, for whatever reason, the zoning changed in the area, an ordinance was put in place regarding the homes, regarding the lots, you know, how long was the lot, you know, vacant. There's all these different things that you really need to figure out
in your due
diligence.
And so a lot of times what happens, right? And let's go on the assumption that the broker or the agent that they've hired, you know, they're putting their best foot forward and presenting the information that they get, right? So they're doing some information to put together the marketing package to get that property out there. And, you know, assuming that they're putting out some information, it's got to be verified, right? So you have to take what's being presented to you in that offering memorandum. You know, I don't want to say with a grain of salt. And there's obviously some brokers who are more diligent in terms of putting together their package than others. And you know, we've brought to you guys some great brokers that are very thorough when they present it. And there's some other ones in the space that do that as well. But as any prudent investor, and we're going to tell you whether it's your first deal or your 100th deal, you know, you always got to keep that in your mind. You have to, you know, trust but verify. And I'm going to go into specifics about a deal that we were in contract on, right? And the broker mentioned to us, hey, a little bit of the park is in a flood zone. In the back, might impact one lot, right? So we looked at the flood zone, and he was correct. It was, the flood zone said, hey, one part of the park in the back hits it. And it was about a 60-unit park, you know, give or take 1 or 2 lots. So we looked at the numbers, right? We looked at the information provided, right? Initially, you know, they had the bill of sales of the homes. We had the year, make, and models. We had the income and expenses. For what it was worth, it was a little choppy, but we had some of that information together, enough where we felt comfortable making an offer on the assumption that the information provided was accurate.
Right.
Give or take, like in a range. You know, listen, you tell me you got, you know, 58 residents and 5 of them are paying and 53 of them are really paying. I mean, that's within the bounds of error, right? The margin of error. So we're in contract, right? And so we're willing to go, and you have to, if you're going to be in this space, and Eric, like Eric just mentioned, if you're going to be in this space, you have to be willing and be comfortable to go into a PSA or purchase and sales agreement prior to stepping on there. So you're going to go into escrow and you're going to give yourself time to do due diligence. So we go down there, right? Not only to check on the site, but what else do we do when we're down there?
What else do we do? You know, obviously we want to count the lots, count the homes. You want to look at the property lines, right? You want to check the infrastructure of the park, right? Is there any issues with the infrastructure of the park? You want to go to the county and you want to talk to the county about, you know, what is on file as being there and, you know, what can be done there.
But one of Eric's, I'm gonna give one of Eric's special skills that he does too, and he probably doesn't even realize he does it. Like, Eric will look at things outside, right? The scope and the boundaries, right? And anybody that knows Eric knows that he does that, right? He goes and pivots into different directions. But what was the one thing you picked up on? Like, the moment we walked into that park, there was one thing that just stood out for you. So in the back, and you got to remember now, we're probably talking, you know, the park was about 6 acres, right? So the flood zone was in the back. But Eric picked up on something that was not on the property, but it was a property that was adjoining it towards the front. What did you see? He picks up on stuff, but his memory sometimes isn't 100%.
What did I pick up on? There
was another home, right?
There was a home that was literally, you know, 12 feet off the ground.
So you had a manufactured home 12 feet off the ground. It looked like they had a, you know, fully developed basement underneath the home. And the stairs, I mean, there was a deck and stairs, and it was 12 feet up in the ground. And what does that tell you when you see that?
So what that told me was, you know, and I don't think that home was it part of the community?
It was not part of the community. It was a separate lot.
I think it probably was part of the community at one point.
Okay.
But it tells me that there's water problems there, right? I mean, this was so obnoxiously, you know,
high
that it didn't look like anything that belonged there. And listen, another thing that you definitely want to do is you really want to get on the ground and you want to talk to residents, right? Because there's residents in that community that have been there forever, right? And, sometimes property owners aren't there all the time, right? Especially if they own the park for a very long time and they don't know about all the issues, to the extent some of these residents may. And the issue with this community was every once in a while, the water levels would literally raise up and basically touch the bottom of the homes.
Yeah, and from the rear to the front, it went about, even though the flood zone was only in the back, the water went 3/4 of the park all the way to the front.
Right, so people actually had to park their cars outside the park, and someone mentioned that they had a canoe to the front of the park when it got really bad.
Yes, right? So now, when we looked at the numbers, obviously one of the things that ticked off for us was, hey, the rents here were really below market. But then when we got there, we realized the reason why those rents were really below market was because the conditions that community was in. Now, mind you, the roads were horrible, but you cannot fix roads if they're constantly going to be eroded with water every time there's a heavy rain.
And that park was septic. Right?
It was septic. And
so what happens when, you have water like that sitting on top of septic tanks? It kind of mixes with what's in the septic tanks
and flood, and
that's basically touching the bottom of the homes.
Correct.
So that was the breaker for us. And I believe we drilled down on that price.
Well,
we drilled down on that price almost to an extent where we almost were going to roll the dice on that one.
Well, yeah. Here's what else we found out. So before we even get to that point, because now we were in contract, right? We had an agreement on price. It was, like I said, 60 lots. I think we were in contract for in the nines, like 950.
Which is a great price.
Great price. But now we understand what's going on here. We also found out that when you looked at the park, the property to the left, there was a drainage ditch and there was a development, and they covered the drainage ditch the whole length of the property, and that drainage ditch led to like a basin in the rear. So you had a double whammy. You're in a flood zone. The drainage ditch to the left had been covered up, and there was no way for that water to go. And to your point, we looked at this and we said, well, we realized we don't have. So our initial underwriting assumptions were we have under market rents. We can make some improvements. We knew the roads had to be done. We knew the homes were old. We knew we had to make some improvements to homogenize the exterior of those homes, to raise up the value. But we realized with those underlying conditions and that flood zone and that water coming in, we wouldn't be able to meet our underwriting assumptions, right? We wouldn't be able to increase the value of those rents. And you're always going to get somebody they're there because it's the most affordable option, right?
Right.
So now we have to make some hard and fast decisions, right? And one is, hey, let's just leave, right? But we subscribe to the theory, and you know what that theory is, right? Right.
No bad real estate, just bad prices.
There's bad prices. There's no bad real estate. There's only bad prices. And so what did we do? We came in with an aggressive retrade, like sub $500,000 retrade. And the reason why, we said, well, if we're going to take this risk, right, because the risk has a value, I want to know that I could get all my money out inside of 4 years. Like, regardless of what happens, we're going to get our money out inside of 4 years. And they came back and they counted, and they tried to meet us halfway almost, even a little bit below halfway. We just weren't comfortable with that.
Well, I mean, what were our options there? Like, how would there was no way for us to really fix the problem. We weren't raising every home, right?
Couldn't.
I mean, that would be, a ridiculously expensive cost.
Correct.
Fixing the drainage issue, just the way the property sat, just didn't look like it could be fixed.
Well, and even if we did the ditch, right? We fixed that drainage ditch. There was no guarantee that was the.
I think you mentioned you wanted to try to raise the land at one point, Frank.
Yeah. We wanted to raise the earth. That was
really the only option, and for that reason, we walked away from that one.
And so we know who purchased the property afterwards, and they got it at a price a little bit more than where they had counted us on it. And we asked them, just going forward, what happens to that property now? And he said specifically, every time it rains, like he's just waiting for those phone calls because he knows that there's going to be a problem, or he's waiting to see what happens. Now, he was willing to take the risk, right? For us, we weren't comfortable with that risk, and that's just knowing when to walk away, right? So even though the price sounds great, if that risk is, I'm not comfortable with, hey, every time there's an inclement weather, or just a heavy rainstorm, am I going to have some damage that I'm not seeing? Am I going to have a septic tank that sinks into the ground? Am I going to have floating matter that I'm going to have to deal with in a sludgy situation, which I'm going to have to pump out? And there's going to be an ongoing maintenance cost, or I'm not going to do it, and I'm going to have a community that I think is substandard, or have to keep that in the portfolio, which is not what we do.
No.
Right. So I think that's such a key element of being able to walk away in that. Let's take another, and you were mentioning this before, Ian. This is, a lot of times when you're acquiring a community from a legacy owner, they may have not brought in a home in a very long period of time. They may have built the park, and the rules and regulations when they were doing their actions, they were completely compliant. But as we've seen, a whole new generation of people have come into planning and zoning departments and throughout the country, right? A lot of these planning departments are starting to modernize, and they realize they want clean data. They want better data. They want to know plots, exactly where things are. And their rules may have changed. So just because, hey, I brought in a home 30 years ago under this guise, and I didn't have to deal with X, Y, and Z, doesn't mean that's today.
Right.
Right? So they're presenting that information. So on the park we just bought in Jacksonville Village, we had, it was presented to us by the owner, 47 lots. It was presented to us that there was 11 vacant lots, and that everything's compliant. We found out in our diligence that, yes, it was compliant when they built. The zoning didn't change, but the text changed. Right? So...
And you find that a lot, right? There's always a new ordinance or something that's happened in town. There's always something that has changed from the original, the original zoning of the plot of the property. In that community, specifically, the ordinance that came out is if a home was not on a lot for 2 years, you basically had to go in for a new approval on that lot.
And you had to rezone it because we weren't compliant.
Right.
The zoning, while the zoning didn't change, the use of the zoning changed. So the county made that zoning non-conforming, but it was conforming when it was built, right? And the owner didn't know that because they've owned it for 40 years, and it was never an issue because they didn't bring in a home in the last 15 years, right? So it was not an issue for them, but it was an issue for us.
Right.
Right? So that to us was, hey, we might be able to get it done, but it would take time. And that time, there's a value to it, right? So we ended up getting a 6-figure reduction in the price because there was a risk associated. Now, we believed, right, we had a high probability of success, right? But we also knew that there was time and money to get to that success, and there was a risk. And so we calculated a number based on that, and you have to be able to do your calculations on what that's going to be. You have to know what your cost that's going to be. What's your cost of money? What's your expected time frame? What happens if it doesn't get approved the first time and you got to go back? You have to count for that, right? There's only one time to count for that. You know the one time to count for that?
Yeah, before you buy it.
Before you buy it, right? So we made a calculation, and having those facts and armed with facts, not just, hey, I want a price reduction, armed with, hey, this is what needs to be done. And they knew, point by point, when they checked what we said, we were spot on with what had to be done. And we had hired people locally that they could trust and verify, right? So they didn't just have to take our word for it, even though we were being, fair and honest. They could trust and verify everything that we said. And after they found out that what we said was exactly right, we said we could take on that risk for a reduction, which was a 6-figure reduction. But if we don't get it, as much as we love that property and we knew we could execute on our plan,
we had to beat a certain number.
Or we were gonna
walk.
And having that ability to walk away, I think it's so important. So a lot of times if you listen to Chris Voss, and I was I was on the other Chris Voss show, but if you listen to Chris Voss, the one with the power in any negotiation is the one who has the ability to walk away. So you have to have the ability to walk away. And we ended up getting it we thought a tremendous value, and we think great things are going to happen there. But it's having that kind of conversation with your partner, with yourself, and knowing, hey, this is where you have to be. I've got to be willing to walk if this doesn't hit this. And that's so important. I think that's one of the key factors to why we've been able to be successful the way we've been able to be successful over the past, how long are we doing this together now?
About 9 years.
Yeah.
Listen, you gotta buy right? And like Frank said, you gotta be willing to take the risk, but there has to be a reward for that risk that you're taking, right? So we were willing to take that risk, but we had to get the price down to make that.
So for anybody listening out there, like I said, whether it's your first deal, whether it's your 50th deal, whether it's your 100th deal, it's knowing when to walk away and knowing how to price that risk. So being comfortable making that offer sometimes on a property that's not there, doing your due diligence, spending that time. Like, don't waste a day. Once you're in PSA, you have 30 days, you have 45 days, whatever the time frame that you have, don't waste a day. Do that due diligence. And if something pops up that's wasn't explained or exposed or disclosed, right, understand what that risk is for you. And if it doesn't match where you think that risk should be valued, be willing to walk away. You'll be successful in your investing and doing it. You'll find better deals. I know everybody wants to do a deal. Everybody has capital that they want to put to work. But the key in all this is saying no more than saying yes, right? It's not saying yes to every deal, but it's saying no to the deals that don't work. So that's a tip from the MHP Exchange today. Know when to hold them, know when to fold them, and know when to
walk away.
Thanks, E. That was a delayed reaction to keep everybody in suspense. If you like this program, follow us on the MHPExchange.com. Subscribe to us on Spotify or iTunes. It's the MHP Exchange Podcast. Rate us, send us a review, and definitely check out the MHP Exchange for opportunity, news, education, and, of course, Chat MHP. Chat, which is the first personal AI agent in the mobile home park space. Until next time, Frank Rizzo on the MHP Exchange.